The Asgardians, known as the powerful deities of Asgard, returned from a successful hunt, having claimed an abundant game. They planned to host a grand feast, one that was to be grander and more opulent than any before. For this special banquet, they would need much more ale than usual. To determine where they could procure the needed ale, the gods carved runes into twigs and cast them as lot sticks. The sticks pointed towards Aegir, a renowned brewmaster believed to possess sufficiently large brewing cauldrons. Thor, the mightiest of the Asgardians, set out to approach Aegir to request the necessary quantity of ale. He found Aegir at the beach, joyfully playing with the waves and spending time with his daughters. However, Thor's demanding tone disrupted Aegir's cheerful mood. The Asgardians were no longer held in the same regard by Aegir as they once were. Aegir reasoned that, if the gods wished to drink in such vast amounts, they should brew their own ale. He set forth a condition: they must first find a cauldron large enough to brew ale for all. Yet such a vast vessel was nowhere to be found. During a council meeting, the Asgardians pondered how they might acquire such a cauldron. Initially, no one seemed to have a solution, until Tyr, one of the Asgardians, suggested visiting his stepfather, the wise giant Hymir, in the east. Hymir possessed a cauldron as deep as miles. Without hesitation, Thor was ready to journey with Tyr to retrieve the massive vessel. But before they set out, Thor inquired how they could secure the deep cauldron. Tyr replied with a smile, "With cunning." Aegir was renowned as a gifted brewmaster, but another giant took center stage in this tale. Hymir, the fiercest of the frost giants. He ruled over the cold and inhospitable ice sea. Only in the summer could one see sufficient light piercing through the snow-covered and stormy clouds. Otherwise, this region on the edge of the heavens was perpetually gray and damp, akin to sea foam. Before dawn broke, Thor and Tyr departed from Asgard. They rode on Thor's chariot, pulled by his mighty goats. With blistering speed, they reached the abode of Tyr's father. There, they unhitched the goats, named Tooth-Gnasher and Tooth-Grinder, and journeyed across the snowfields to Hymir's residence. Upon entering his hall, they were surprised to only encounter the giant's ancient grandmother with her 900 heads. Hymir himself was absent, wandering amidst the icebergs. However, his wife, a graceful giantess with a shimmering golden dress and white blonde hair, warmly greeted them. In her youth, the giantess had encountered the charming Odin and had been seduced by him. From their union, Tyr was born. She held a special affection for her son, and, being the mother of the war god, enjoyed a high status among the giantesses. However, her relationship with her husband, Hymir, was intricate. She had both benefited and faced challenges because of it. Tyr confided in his mother about the purpose of their visit, and she promised to assist the Asgardians. But she also cautioned them about Hymir's caprices and advised them to hide behind the cauldrons hanging from a crossbeam. For when Hymir entered the hall, he trembled not from cold, but from his inherent miserliness. Tyr and Thor, both brave Asgardians, didn't fear the giant Hymir. They disregarded the hiding spot suggested to them and chose to sit on a bench against the hall's gable wall instead. As they awaited Hymir's return, they relished the ample beer and conversed with Tyr's mother. After some time, they heard the rumbling of glaciers outside, signaling Hymir's return. As he entered the hall, he brought with him hunting spoils. Icicles clinked against his long and broad beard that concealed his face and was attached to his chest. His voice resonated like the grinding of ice chunks. The graceful giantess greeted her husband and attempted to temper his frosty breath with her warmth. "Our son is here," she said, "after a long and arduous journey. How we've awaited him! And by his side is the protector of humans, Thor." Hymir fixed his gaze on the gable of the hall. Under the intensity of his stare, the pillar shattered, and the sturdy crossbeam, from which the cauldrons hung, broke in two. As Hymir's gaze met the gable of the hall, 8 of the cauldrons crashed down, shattering into countless pieces. Only one cauldron, which was particularly sturdily forged, remained intact. Thor and Tyr rose and stepped into the center of the hall. Hymir's eyes closely tracked every movement of the mighty Thor. Though he was uneasy with Thor's presence in his hall, he chose to adhere to the rules of hospitality, especially because of his stepson, Tyr. To prepare for the feast, 3 oxen were slaughtered. The pieces of meat were wrapped in leaves and placed in a large pit lined with stones. A fierce fire heated the stones to near glowing temperatures. The pit was then covered with earth, and the meat was cooked within. During the lavish meal, Thor alone ate 2 of the oxen, deeply surprising Hymir. He remarked that they would need to go fishing together the next day, given Thor's displayed appetite. "Provide me with bait, and I'll venture out to the sea with you," Thor confidently responded. Hymir, slightly sarcastic, suggested that someone with Thor's appetite surely should be capable of securing his own bait. "My herd is outside," Hymir added, hinting at where Thor might look. Thor made his way to Hymir's herd of oxen. These animals were larger than the typical bulls and grazed at the edge of a nearby forest. The largest and mightiest among them was a black bull, known as the one who charges at the sky. Its massive horns even tore through the drifting clouds. Without hesitation, Thor decapitated the impressive beast and carried its head to the beach. Hymir had already drawn a boat into the water and was waiting. Upon seeing the bleeding head of his finest bull, he glared at Thor disapprovingly. "Don't you think you'll freeze if we venture too far out into the open sea?" the giant grumbled. "I'll row as far out as I wish," Thor confidently retorted. "Who knows, perhaps it's you who will want to return first. Will your ears turn red from the cold?" In his anger, Thor reached for his hammer, Mjolnir, ready to strike Hymir a powerful blow. However, he restrained himself, lowered his hammer, and conserved his strength for later. After they had loaded the gear and bait onto the boat, they boarded. Thor took a seat at the back, grasped 2 oars, and began rowing powerfully, while Hymir sat at the front of the boat, rowing as well. With powerful strokes, they quickly navigated the boat to the fishing grounds, where Hymir typically caught flounders. Upon arrival, Hymir set aside the oars and prepared to fish. However, Thor interrupted. "Hold on, I wish to go further out." Hymir hesitated, warning Thor, "Not any further. The Midgard serpent lurks out there." "You fear your own kin," Thor teased, and insisted on moving further into the open sea. Hymir was reluctant, rowing only half-heartedly, making Thor exert himself even more. After a while, Thor felt they were far enough. He believed they were at the right spot for his fishing endeavor. While Hymir spread out his fishing gear, hoping to catch a whale, Thor prepared his own line. He took a sturdy string, attached a large, robust fishing hook, and skewered the bleeding head of the bull onto it. With a determined look, he cast the line into the water, ready for whatever lay ahead. Deep in the abyssal trenches, where daylight no longer reached, Thor's mighty bait descended. The Midgard serpent, the massive creature encircling the entire Middle Realm, sensed the blood from the bait and grew curious. With a swift snap, it bit onto the bait, feeling the sharp pain of the hook piercing its palate. Thor, feeling the fierce tug on the line, gave the serpent some slack, believing he had achieved his goal and captured the monster. But suddenly, the serpent pulled on the line with such force that Thor, even though he held on with both hands, was thrown against the side of the boat. The Midgard serpent, realizing its mistake, tried to break free and deceive its captor. But Thor, with his immense strength, was not so easily fooled. As the serpent pulled, Thor stepped with such force against the side of the boat that he broke through it and stood firmly on the ocean floor. With this steadiness, he pulled the massive serpent from the depths of the sea to the edge of the boat. As the serpent looked up angrily and furiously from below, it spat venom in Thor's direction. However, the bait and the hook blocked its mouth, preventing it from snapping at the boat. Without hesitation, Thor drew his mighty hammer, Mjolnir. He remembered how he once mistook the serpent for a harmless cat, but this time he had outsmarted it, and the hook was firmly lodged in the creature's palate. Thor wound up with his hammer, Mjolnir, so intensely that the air around him began to hiss. He took a moment to let the serpent feel his immense strength, relished the feeling of superiority, and readied himself to deliver the fatal blow. But as he reveled in this triumphant moment, he overlooked Hymir, who was trembling in shock and had turned pale. It was a terrifying spectacle, as Thor and the gleaming Midgard serpent locked eyes. Their gazes crossed in an intense duel, and the boat rocked violently. When Thor finally struck with his hammer, Hymir, in blind panic, cut the fishing line with his knife. The mighty serpent escaped and disappeared into the depths of the sea. Thor, angry and disappointed, cast a furious glance at Hymir and punched him. The giant was thrown overboard, and the last thing seen of him were his feet disappearing into the water. Yet, despite his anger, Thor saved Hymir and pulled him back aboard. They sat side by side, dripping wet, on the beach, with water flowing from their garments back into the sea. Although Thor had almost captured the Midgard serpent, Hymir was still without fish for dinner and had also lost his boat. So, he pulled a second boat named Seahorse into the water and equipped it with new fishing gear. This time, they stayed closer to the shore. Hymir, in an attempt to secure dinner, successfully caught 2 whales. As they landed, Hymir challenged Thor, suggesting he either secure the boat or bring the 2 whales ashore. Without hesitation, Thor lifted the entire boat, including the water inside, the oars, and the scoop, onto his shoulders. He carried it along with the 2 whales to Hymir's homestead. Both Thor and Hymir stood on a hill, gazing out at the sea. They watched as the Midgard serpent writhed in the water, churning the waves. It was clear that she was furious and seeking revenge. In Hymir's hall, the giant tried to provoke Thor. "You may have strong hands, as shown by your rowing and your fight against the serpent," Hymir taunted, "but you don't have the power to break this goblet. No one does." Accepting the challenge, Thor grabbed the goblet and hurled it against a stone pillar. The pillar shattered into 1,000 pieces, but the goblet was returned to Hymir unscathed. Hymir laughed maliciously and said, "See, even against the Midgard serpent, you were powerless." However, Tyr, Hymir's stepson, overheard his mother's soft words. She leaned towards Thor and whispered in his ear, "Throw the goblet against Hymir's head. Nothing is harder than that." Without hesitation, Thor rose, gathered all his strength, and hurled the goblet with all his might against Hymir's forehead. The giant's head remained intact, but the goblet shattered into many pieces. "My precious goblet," lamented the giant Hymir, staring sadly at the shards. He drank no more beer in mourning for his lost treasure. "With the goblet went my luck and the art of brewing flavorful beer. I shall never raise a goblet to my lips again." Tyr, standing beside his mother, chimed in, "The brewing vat must be taken away." "Remove it from the courtyard," Hymir shouted angrily. "Only he who can lift it may take it." Tyr tried first to move the massive vat, but couldn't budge it an inch. Then Thor stepped forward, gripped the rim of the vat, and with a mighty heave, lifted it over his head. The rings of the vat clinked against Thor's powerful calves. Hardly had they started their journey back to Asgard when they heard the sound of rolling stones and crunching footsteps. Turning around, they saw Hymir's 4-headed warrior army moving toward them like a rock slide. Amidst these gray, rugged figures that looked like boulders stood Hymir, ready to attack. Without hesitation, Thor set down the vat and reached for his hammer, Mjolnir. With a few mighty blows, he shattered the charging warriors and Hymir as well. After this confrontation, Thor and Tyr reached the hall of Aegir unhindered. The sea giant was now prepared to brew beer for all the Asgardians. And so, at Aegir's, the Asgardians held one of their last great feasts, which ended without disputes or misfortune.